All right, so obviously we've had something happen in Alabama that we didn't quite expect, which affects 1/50th of the nation's politics because there are 50 senators. Basically, the state of Alabama was forced to have a progressive as one of their two representatives because democracy failed. And I'll explain that in just a moment, but let's just look at how it failed. In the first place, everyone recognizes that conservatives, um, especially in Senate elections, have always enjoyed an extremely large percentage of support in Alabama. Always. It's been in excess of 65% to 70%. Um, so obviously, Alabama did not elect a conservative, and it's not because the people's values changed. It's because the conservative voice in this race was squished. Okay, and I'll explain how it happened and what needs to happen to stop democracy from being crushed. And basically, the way it was crushed is that the conservative choice, um, the conservative choice was weakened substantially, and there was no other route for the conservative voice to then come back and choose a different person. Okay, so here's what basically happened. Um, the final thing it appears is that Moore lost because of some sexual allegations that happened 40 years ago, apparently um, relating to some minor girls. Whether it's true or not really doesn't matter in the discussion of whether or not democracy prevailed, because the conservative voice would say that we want a person that represents our values. And because conservatives were not able to vote for their conservative, well, I can't even say their conservative choice, they weren't able to vote for any conservative choice in strong enough numbers in order for their will to be represented in government. Basically, government does not represent their will because Doug Jones does not represent the conservative will of Alabama. Now, um, interesting enough, if we add up the write-ins to Roy Moore to say maybe what if all of these votes were basically people that couldn't vote for Roy Moore but they wanted to vote anyways instead of just staying home. If those were added together, there actually would have been enough for the conservative choice, whatever it might have been. It would have been 51.1%, greater than 49.9%. So just saying, um, if there is a way, then let's just say, and oftentimes it does happen where there is more than two candidates in our two-party system, but what usually happens is this. If there's more than two, everybody recognizes that there are basically two, usually Republican and Democrat, who have the chance of winning. And so let's just say those are these two, and I decide to write in my vote. What basically happens is because Moore did not get my vote, he does not get the 51.1%. Let's say I represent all the write-ins. Okay, he doesn't get the higher percent to be able to beat Doug Jones. And since he doesn't get that, that means that he loses. So a vote for a third party means the guy you want, or I should say the guy that represents the values you want, loses. Now, let's just say that a lot of people that were in here didn't really want him. If there was a third candidate and there was an opportunity for them to write a primary choice for that third person, then if that third person ended up being 1.7%, then they could select a secondary choice, and then basically what would happen is the smallest number of these three would be dropped out, and then their votes would go to their secondary choice, and the conservative voice would have, would have representation. Now let's just say that everybody believed I guess the allegations against Roy Moore, which it seems like they did, and it seemed pretty credible. And let's just say one of the other people in the primaries in the Republican primaries was that write-in. And let's just say that, we'll say a good percentage of the Roy Moore people wrote him in as a primary. So let's put, say, 30% of this vote down here. This would have been 31%. And let's just say that a lot of people, well, let's just say that the rest of these put the write-in as a secondary. Okay, so this was 32%. This would be then 18%. And then all these that had their secondaries as the write-in then would bring this together as 51%. Now let's say that's obviously a clear win for the write-in, because in the first evaluation, Jones would have 49%, and this would be 31%. Moore would drop out at 18%. And then the votes of all the people who voted for this candidate then would have had the option to switch their vote, or to have a secondary vote, I should say, for the write-in, saying that this candidate more closely matches their values. Okay, so that would be 51.1%. But let's also say that the people voting for Doug Jones, maybe 10% of the people that voted for Jones would have voted for the conservative candidate, but just couldn't because of the allegations. Okay, and then they would have the opportunity maybe to put their primary as the conservative, as this other conservative, and then so that would be another 10% or 61%. But then they could set Jones as the secondary. So what they'd in essence be saying is, my first choice is conservative because he represents my values, but then my second choice, if it comes down between Jones and Moore, I'd rather put my support behind Jones than Moore, because maybe I really don't like the allegations against him. Okay, so in that way they would have the option to be able to support a conservative candidate that's not just a write-in but actually has his name in there, and then to be able to back Jones, to say I really don't want Moore in there. Okay, and that's an option. So giving people the chance to have first and second choices, and then to let the vote switch to their second choice if the first choice, say if the first choice is eliminated because it's the smallest percent in the list of candidates. And so that's a kind of runoff style election where you let the smallest, the choices with the smallest support drop off and their votes go to their secondary choices. And then the secondary choices can more closely match their values, or match what the person they want representing them, instead of just letting the vote go to waste. So, all right, that's I think the solution to this lack of democracy. Obviously, let's just say it came out, and just to further emphasize how we did not have a democracy here, how this was not, that a lot of people did not have their votes and their values represented in government, complete failure of government. Let's just say that Roy Moore, let's just say it came out that there was solid evidence that not only had he done those things, but let's say he had also kidnapped, abducted, killed, and discarded, 100 other girls' bodies, say minor bodies, minor, but I mean minor is the definition of 18 or younger, little girls' bodies in the forest. And let's say that came out a week before the election, and then all of a sudden, all of this 48% now doesn't exist, and let's say it's zero. Okay, with a 0% and no conservative voice, no conservative representative, no person that a conservative could say would represent them on the ballot, you've essentially blacked out this line and left only one default option, Doug Jones. And whenever you do that, where you take half of the population to say, I'm sorry, but you no longer can vote for that person in good conscience, you no longer have somebody that represents your values, then there is no more democracy. Literally, democracy does not exist. There is no vote. There is no election. It's a fraud. It's a sham. it's you call it an election, but it's not. And that's, I think, exactly what happened here. It wasn't quite that extreme because one, people didn't believe it. Two, it was 40 years ago, and people changed. Maybe it happened and they changed. Maybe it didn't happen and people's memory changed. You know, there's a lot of things that account for why people would go that way and say, well, I want somebody to represent my values anyway. But in essence, this was an election sham. The conservatives obviously did not have their values represented here, and I think we should all hang our heads in shame that democracy failed. And to be honest, I think it's failed many times before, but this is one of the worst examples of democracy failing that, frankly, I've ever seen. And it's not necessarily because I like Roy Moore. I can't say that. There are a lot of things I like about him. There are some things I'm like, yeah, I hope it's not true. All these allegations. There's a lot of other things that I'm like, you know, admitting things I don't like. But the biggest point is people need to have a voice. They need to have somebody they can vote for that represents their values. And we can't just ignore democracy because we don't like their values. All right, so that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like it. If you have any comments to add to this on what democracy means to you, or ways to improve the ability of an election to represent the values of the people. And to be honest, if my suggestion could have been implemented, to be honest, I think there are a lot of people that stayed home because they didn't want to vote for Moore and would have come out to vote. And any way that you can get allow a person to have more of their voice represented in an election, the better. So anyhow, thanks for watching. Please like this and enjoy your day.